Okay, so as it was already mentioned, the materials here can contain difficult language. So I feel it is necessary to give a sort of a content warning. So the materials that will be discussed do refer to slavery and enslaved people, violence and racism. Furthermore, the letters over there that I will be quoting from contain problematic and racist terms such as Negro. While I do feel uncomfortable saying these words out loud, I feel it is important to quote the letters as they were written to acknowledge the realities of the slavery past and also the violence embedded within these letters. Not saying these words out loud, I feel, might minimize the atrocities of the slavery past. So today I will be discussing a small selection from the Barham Papers Jamaica correspondence. The Foster Barham family owned multiple sugar and rum estates in Jamaica, and the letters that we will be looking at today are from the years 1764 and 1768, and discuss an array of mostly business matters related to the Mesopotamia estate in the Jamaican Westmoreland parish. So the estate would have been located, around here, this area near the mountains. The letters were written by manager Daniel Barnjum, living in Jamaica, to Joseph Foster Barham, the first in England, who owned the estate from 1749 until his death in 1789, after which his son inherited the profitable estate. So while these letters discuss mostly business matters related to the estate, such as bills, the crop, invoices, they do also refer to enslaved people working at the Mesopotamia estate. It is, however, important to note that these references to enslaved people are also inscribed within this business-like discourse, and that they are made through the eyes of the people, in this case the manager Daniel Barnjum, exploiting them. However, if we take a slower approach to these letters and acknowledge the biases and violences embedded within them, they can reveal something about the lived experiences of the enslaved and their treatment, and in particularly the discourse that the manager Daniel Barnjum uses to describe how he treats these enslaved people, something which is greatly influenced by his wish to manage the estate well and to make a profit to respond to his employer's expectations. So in his letters, we can at times discover him trying to fashion himself as a kind, compassionate, and benevolent master who takes good care of his enslaved and treats them justly. This self-positioning and idea of benevolence is something that is more frequently found in 18th century pro-slavery discourse, according to Candace Ward, who I quote writes, "Slave owners are routinely portrayed by themselves and others as men of sense or of feeling, whose private interests depend upon the measure of their benevolence in treating slaves with compassion," end quote. However, as Ward already indicates here, this benevolence is not selfless, rather it's intrinsically tied to the slave owners, or in Barnjum's case, manager's interest. Barnjum's letter of the 20th of July of 1764 over here to Joseph Foster Barham clearly illustrates this. He writes that he has given the enslaved workers several days off from working the estate to take care of the land that he has recently given them. Barnjum reports, and I quote, "I shall go up with them," being the enslaved workers, "in a few days, in order to make an equal distribution of it," being the plantain walk. "And if they are then but tolerably careful, they need never be in want of plantains again, which I'm sorry to say is in some measure the case now. But as the Negroes will now have a larger portion and a very good mountain ground, which I shall take care to see they keep properly clean, I think they will not be in danger of a scarcity again, except something very extraordinary happens. I have provided the new Negroes with exceeding good grounds, which in a little time they will be able to provide for themselves, but at present I am obliged to feed them," end quote. So while Barnjum seems to want to position himself as kind by writing that he gave the enslaved workers exceeding good grounds, it quickly becomes clear that it is not benevolence that is at the heart of these actions. Rather, by giving the enslaved workers provision grounds, he will no longer have to spend money on feeding them. Furthermore, while he describes the land as exceeding good and very good mountain grounds, this might not be the truth either. In his book A Tale of Two Plantation, Richard Dunn explains the following on the provision grounds allocated to enslaved workers at the estate several decades later. I quote, "Left unsaid in the 1802 and 1814 reports, though observed by Moravian missionaries, was the fact that the slave provision grounds were all laid out in mountain land on the edge of the estate, a laborious 3 to 5 mile walk from the slave village. Indeed, it appears that the Barham's managers deliberately made slaves waste time getting to and from distant provision grounds to discourage them from producing extra food that they could sell in the market at Savannah Lamar," end quote. So the provision ground for the enslaved workers in 1764 also being located in the mountains, it is not unlikely that they had to face the same challenges in reaching them. Barnjum's letter of the 20th of May of 1768, the one over here, further illustrates him wanting to position himself as a benevolent master but revealing his actual intentions. In this letter, Barnjum writes, I quote, "It has been an established maxim with me to use as little severity as possible, in which I have no doubt of your concurrence, but such is the perverse disposition of some Negroes that a man is drove to it, though ever so much against his inclination, and some of these we have who you very judiciously order to be shipped off. But from scarcity of hands and in hopes of amendment, it has not been done yet, and they still continue as bad as ever, with some others are an encumbrance to the estate." End quote. So Barnjum tries to represent himself here as a friendly master who does not use unnecessary violence. He tries to be kind, he argues, but the enslaved people afford him no other choice than to be severe, even though supposedly he does not want to be. Barnjum then, going on to describe the enslaved workers as perverse and wanting to ship them off, reveals his actual character and beliefs typical of slave owners during the Enlightenment period, according to Tyson and Oldroyd, who explain, and I quote, "Slave owners rationalized the use of harsh discipline as an essential tool to compel attendance and sustain work effort among a captive and unwilling labor force on the grounds that it was to the slave's moral advantage. To support their use of physical coercion, slave owners frequently argued that African bondsmen were uncivilized, lazy, and superstitious, and that they lacked the intellectual capacity and self-discipline needed to become effective contributors to society." End quote. Even the medical treatment of the enslaved during Barnjum's time as a manager reveals that his benevolence is more a matter of business interest. In his letter of the 15th of July 1768, the last one over here, Barnjum discusses the smallpox going around among the enslaved workers. He decides to have several of them inoculated and to let them recover. However, again, this decision is tied to his financial interest. Justin Roberts explains, I quote, "Every element of a planter's medical management of his workers was geared toward maximizing the amount of work slaves could perform, without having to rely too excessively on imports. For most planters, letting a slave recover from illness or injury was less a matter of benevolent management and more a matter of exchanging the present value of a slave's work for greater future value. Permitting a sick slave to occasionally miss a day or half a day, one Jamaican insisted, would obviate the loss probably of many days," end quote. So this business interest involved in the medical treatment of enslaved workers is clearly present in Barnjum's management as well. After all, he decides not to have all of the enslaved inoculated at the same time, but rather only half of them. The other half will be inoculated once the first half has had the chance to recover and can work again. This way, Barnjum minimizes the amount of labor lost and safeguards the estate's profit. So in short, while Barnjum seems to want to portray himself as a benevolent master or a man of sense or feeling, his letters reveal that this supposed benevolence is tied to his business interest. Everything Barnjum does, including the way in which he treats the enslaved workers, he does to ensure the estate's and his own interest. The enslaved Mesopotamia workers are not at all treated kindly or justly, and this is exemplified by enslaved people such as Richmond and others who are not named, but who are referred to in a handful of Barnjum's letters, who try to take matters into their own hands by rebelling or running away. Altogether, it's clear that Barnjum is not benevolent at all, but rather a shrewd businessman, highlighting the importance of considering how this idea of benevolence can be deployed by individuals involved in the system of slavery in different ways, such as using it as a form to justify slavery.